Hi, everyone. I'm attorney Donna DiMaggio Berger, and this is Take It to the Board, where we speak condo and HOA. When asked why they purchased a condominium unit or a home in a homeowners association, many people reply that they wanted to feel secure. That sense of security can sometimes come in the form of gates, walls, and guards, but just as often it comes as a result of the screening process that a board uses to evaluate whether a potential purchaser or a potential tenant should be approved to live in the community. Residents may feel that they are safer knowing that their neighbors have been screened and approved. Not surprisingly, however, the decision to deny a potential purchaser or a potential renter is often met with pushback and sometimes met with accusations from the applicants who were denied. This is why a background report is such a critical piece of the screening puzzle and one that boards, residents, and applicants all should thoroughly understand. I'm fortunate to have Robert Sanchez on the podcast today. Robert and I are going to discuss how reliable screening reports are, what they cover, what they cost, and whether foreign applicants can be screened as thoroughly as domestic ones. Robert Sanchez began his career in the banking and finance industry, specializing in mortgage lending. In 1999, Robert co-founded United Screening Services Corporation, which is a background screening company focusing on tenant and pre-employment background checks. He served as vice president and chief operating officer until 2018, which was when the company was acquired by SARMA. Robert is the business development and customer success manager of SARMA's background screening division and is a member of the senior management operations committee. Robert, welcome to Take It to the Board.
Hi, Donna. How are you? Thank you for inviting me to your podcast. I'm honored and really excited to be here today.
We're really excited to have you, Robert, because as you can imagine, as a community association attorney, background screening comes up a lot. You know, a lot of boards feel that that's one of their main functions is to enforce the rules and to know who's coming into the community, either as a purchaser or as a renter.
So yes, you can do a background check on your neighbor or on anyone as long as the data is available to the general public. For example, you can walk into Broward County. They have a system there and put in my name and see if I have a criminal background check. There's nothing wrong with that. It's an open state and the data is available. Where things get hairy is if you're going to use that background check to deny something from someone. And in this case, being housing or employment or any other thing. So if we're looking at condominium associations, they technically will be considered a landlord because they're going to do a background check to see if that individual can move into their community based on whatever criterion they have as a policy. With that in mind, the Fair Credit Reporting Act allows them to do a background check, and they have a permissible purpose under the FCRA to conduct that background check. To continue to move forward with that background, they have to notify that consumer. We call the applicants consumer because it's a consumer report in the eyes of the FCRA. So the consumer or the applicant needs to be notified that, yes, I'm welcome here, but you need to do a background check.
And so most people applying to purchase in a condo or an HOA or to rent, they will be given an application. So that's the notice, right? Here's your application. They fill it out.
It could be, as long as it has certain language. The certain language required in the authorization and disclosure form for running this background check. Normally, the applications that I see from a lot of the associations don't really have the right language that's required. So it is very important that if you work with a background screening company, that they can provide you with the proper forms that are compliant at the time, or use best practices at the current time that you can furnish your applicants. You don't want to, say, run a credit report on an individual, and credit reports is a sticky subject because individuals are now very cognizant of their credit scores, and they have subscribed to all of these services that alert them right away when something comes up, and then all of a sudden they see, XYZ condo / SARMA pulled my credit yesterday. I never authorized them to do that. And under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, you better have an authorization form for that individual. Otherwise, you can file a complaint and it can become a big problem for you.
Well, I wanted to ask that. So, because you just covered a lot of territory, Robert. So, first of all, you say you work with a lot of associations or you've seen applications where they don't necessarily have the correct notification and consent language, right? What's the possible penalties involved?
Well, if you're found that this is your normal course of business and some legal attorney figures this out, they can possibly file a class action suit against you because now everybody you ran, you don't have the right authorization and disclosure form. And during discovery, I bet you they're going to contact everybody that they did a background check to. So all of a sudden, the association can find themselves in a big problem. And we as background screeners, the authorization and disclosure form really is a responsibility of the association. But at the same time, you know how litigious we are. So the next thing comes, well, if you saw these authorization forms or these applications, why did you say something to the association? So we are very careful about that, although it's not our responsibility in the eyes of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. We try to guide our customers. We try to help them out. We have forms at SARMA that we provide that are vetted through our FCRA attorneys, and we give them to them, and we encourage them to use them. And we also encourage them to hand them to their attorney and let them also review them because that's important as well.
Well, I want our listeners to let that sink in because there are law firms out there that do bring these type of class actions, whether it's what you just articulated, which is a deficiency in the background notification. I've seen law firms go after associations for charging too much in terms of transfer fees and application fees. And you're right, depending on your state statute of limitation, this can go back for years, and they do. And you could be talking, depending on the size of the HOA or the condominium, you could be talking hundreds of people who may be impacted, where the association may be forced to go back and pay those fees back, as well as any statutory punitive damages. So this is really important. I will tell you that a lot of associations hire professional management, and they just let the management company deal with this. So, and they're not thinking when they're hiring, hey, by the way, are all your forms compliant with federal and state, laws? This is something that I hope our listeners, if they're doing background screening, and if it's something that they've delegated to their manager or their management company, that they have that conversation and that they check with association counsel as well.
I agree with you 100%. Where you find the most professional management companies do have the right forms, or they will ask the screening company to provide them with the forms, but you can't leave that to chance.
Right.
You can be involved in as an association. You can be wrapped into that lawsuit, and you probably know this better than I, as an attorney, wrapped into that lawsuit for something that management company did on your behalf.
Oh,
so,
well. Yeah, everybody's getting sued. When things go wrong, everybody's getting sued. But you talked about, I think most people know that you need specific consent to run a credit check because, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a repercussion. The more times somebody's credit is checked, it can have a negative effect on the score. Do you need the same kind? I don't know that people have the same understanding for other types of background screening. So let's say you've got a client that says, I don't care about the credit because, I tell my clients this, if you ran credit reports on your long-term residents, you may be shocked what you find out in terms of what their credit is, and they're still good residents, right? They're still paying their assessments on time. But let's say a client comes and says, I don't care about the credit check, Robert, but I do want to do a criminal background check. Specific consent needed for criminal background?
Yes, if you are possibly looking at denying that individual housing based on that background report you're going to order from SARMA or another background screener, then you have to have them sign the authorization form. If you send them to a courthouse, say, hey, go bring me your own background check. Then in theory, you probably don't need an authorization because the consumer is walking to the courthouse or to a police station asking for their own background and willingly handing it to you. That's a totally different story. They gave it to you. It's their report. If they want to give it to you, they can give it to you. So that's kind of a distinction we should kind of make. But if you're using a background screening company and any of the data, doesn't matter whether it's publicly available information, it may be used to deny that person then you should have a signed authorization and disclosure form. Because what happens is that form also tells them who ran the background check. And let's just say courts have errors. Yeah, I'm sure you can attest to that. And if there's an error under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, that consumer has a right to contact us and say, "Hey, that's a mistake. This is really what happened," and then we're now obligated, very strict procedures under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, obligated to re-verify everything that they claim may not be theirs or may be incorrect. So.
Well, I want, if there's any directors listening and they're going to go take it upon themselves to go to the local courthouse or the local police department and run their own report, yes, they're entitled to that, but they can't really act on it. So they couldn't then take what they have found, bring it to the board, and use it as a basis for denial.
They can if the consumer is willingly bringing it to them.
Robert, that's not happening. But I did want to ask you about mistakes, because even if you're running your own report, or you're going through a screening company, a lot depends on getting the identity right of the person you're screening. Talk to us a little bit about that.
That's 100% correct as well, that statement. We have to make sure that when we report a record, we have enough identifiers under the FCRA to say, yes, this record belongs to the individual. It is a challenging task. We have many different tools at our disposal within the office to use as research to pinpoint those records, especially when it comes to common names. I mean, common names are, of course, a difficulty because there are a lot of people with the same name and the same date of birth. And over the years, if I look back at when I started in 1999, you looked at a court record online in 1999 and it had everything. It had the person's date of birth, it had the person's social security number, their address. That's all gone. Fraudsters figure that out, and they would just hop into Miami-Dade County website, run random names, and here's everything they need to steal their identity. Gotcha. So the courts, in many case law, has said, well, you got to cut this out. And systematically, they've been removing. SSNs are gone. You can't see them anymore unless you actually order the physical file. Date of birth is still there. Some jurisdictions truncated that date of birth and only gives you the birth year. So it is a challenge, but there are tools that we use to be able to pick up that information and accurately report the correct records.
Well, if you have this, I would assume the social security number is crucial.
It's crucial, but these days for criminal background checks, it's almost useless because most court systems don't keep it anymore as part of an identifier. So if it came down to the individual now disputing a record, where we actually now physically send someone to the courthouse, pull the hard file, then that hard file may or may not, depending on the court and the county clerk, may or may not have their social or a copy of it or what have you. In those cases, it's very useful because now we're doing a dispute. We're checking in the background to satisfy a dispute made by the consumer.
So this just become a lot more complicated from what you're telling me. Right. So how useful, you said you have some tools to try to narrow down the person you're searching. Can you tell me a few of them?
Well, yeah, there are just systems that are available to our industry that we subscribe to. Just try to validate information. Some of it is only used for research. It can only be used for research because the way the data is presented, it's not FCRA compliant, so it can't land on a background report, but it's useful for us to try to maybe find a middle name, maybe find an address, that a prior address that we can link into that record. So it's a whole process.
What about photos? What about photographic evidence?
Some cases have photos, most don't.
Also, people change. If it was 20 years ago or 10, you never know.
We've now that you mentioned that, we've found over the years in a computer, and there's 5 of us. Is that the same guy or is that a different guy? And people change. They lose their hair. They gain weight. They lose weight. So
they change a lot more than that. They can transition to a different gender.
That's correct. Yeah. So it's a challenging business, but heck, we do a pretty good job. I mean, there's seldomly an error. I mean, they're very rare in our industry, and when they rarely occur, we immediately go through all the hoops of making sure that the second re-report is 100% correct with documentation to prove it. So it's
A lot of my clients are, obviously criminal background is important to know. Credit also in some communities, they want to make sure that anybody buying, particularly for purchasers buying in the community, that they have the financial means to stay current on all of their obligations. But they're equally concerned about applicants who may have created a nuisance in another community, may have been litigious. So when the person comes in, they can almost be guaranteed that they're going to have problems from the outset. Do you, as part of your screening, do you ever contact references, former neighbors, or other people where you actually talk to them about this applicant?
we do verifications by definition. They do all the verifications, and in that department, they also handle references. When I go back to 1999 again, when I started in this industry, a lot of the packages that were available at that time and the associations were requesting included references, at least three references, and a lot of that type of verification. It has kind of really dwindled along the way. I mean, most of our packages, unless it's a custom package, does not have references. The reason being, I think twofold. One is price,
Mhm.
and number two is that who gives a bad reference? I mean, you're going to put your friend down and say, "Hey, I'm going to put you as a reference. Can you give me a good reference?" Right? And the other answer to your question is, do we go and call neighbors? And no, we don't. We're not really PIs. That kind of will involve
Mm.
private investigating. And it's sort of like thin ice because let's just say that I live next to you and you and I just don't get along. Doesn't reflect anything on me or on you. We could be stellar residents, but you and I just don't click, and we're fighting all the time.
Right.
Would you use that information now, which could be perceived maybe as hearsay, to deny somebody housing? So you got to really be careful using uninterested third parties' opinion about you to form your decision on a background check.
Yeah,
That's
it's a fair point. Let me ask you, Robert, for your association customers, what are they focusing on in terms of these background reports? What are they looking for?
Most associations these days are looking at credit, criminal, and eviction searches. That's kind of the most popular packages. There's still quite a few that would do a verification of employment, and I think there's some validity there, and a verification of landlord if the individual is currently renting somewhere else. Now, I think that to the question we just recently went over about references and neighbors, the verification of landlord is still a good verification. You're calling the prior person that they rented from, and we technically ask questions like, hey, were they late? Were they good neighbors? And again, this is all arbitrary. I mean, it's whatever the person wants to share with you. So,
So let's talk about credit scores, because as I said a few minutes ago, I think a lot of boards would be shocked if they ran credit scores on even fellow board members. You never know what's going on with somebody's
yeah,
credit. What are the ranges of good, bad, just
yeah,
to set the stage here?
yeah. So, if you look at any of the different credit models, they go between 300, which is the lowest, to 850. That's kind of the range. Gosh, credit score started, I think I looked it up the other day, in 1967. Or 1956, I'm sorry. Two guys, an engineer and a mathematician, Bear and Isaac, came up with FICO, and here we are.
Yeah.
There are 16 versions of FICO, and they keep changing the algorithm. That's basically what these versions are, in trying to perfect it. And 21 versions of Vantage. Vantage is the one owned by TU, by TransUnion. And FICO is owned by FICO, but it's primarily used by Equifax and Experian. And you fall somewhere between there. I think being in this industry such a long time and then being in the mortgage industry prior to that,
Hmm.
I can tell you, I mean, I've been around credit forever. And here's the simple answer to people get really hung up on the actual score.
Oh, yeah.
Individuals with bad credit are going to have a low score, regardless of what algorithm you run them to. And likewise, individuals with good credit are going to have a high credit score, regardless whether you use Vantage or FICO or what have you. It's just people with good credit have good scores and vice versa. As far as kind of industry standards, I would say 670 is the last number of what's considered good. So they have it as excellent, very good, good, fair, and poor. That's kind of
So what's the cutoff again, Robert?
on the good,
Yeah.
670.
670. So how do you get good credit? Because I've heard different things. Is it the more credit cards you have that you're paying on time get you there, or fewer credit cards paying on time? What's the path to good credit?
We're not a credit expert company. Being around the credit reporting field for years, I can give you some insight of my personal experience. Number one is pay your bills on time. I mean, that's what gets you to have good credit. From there, these algorithms use different things. The more credit you have and paying balances off, that increases your credit score. People with very low credit, they see it as this person really with not very low credit, but few credit trade lines. It could be viewed as someone who doesn't have experience with credit. So the algorithms look at that. So you want to have a combination of just paying your bills on time, paying most of your credit cards if you can, pay them off completely, and then using them and paying them off completely, and having a fair amount. I don't know what the fair amount is.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Don't the algorithms take into account the person's income versus how much credit they've taken?
I don't believe I can't answer that question. I don't believe that they'll take income into consideration. They're looking at credit as a whole. How much of your entire credit you're using up? Are you not paying it off? Are you just paying minimum payments? That is what's kind of start affecting your credit score.
That's interesting to me. So if I make $50,000 a year, but I've got an outstanding credit of $100,000, even though I'm paying it on time, I guess I've got a side job nobody knows about, or
As long as you're paying for it on time and you don't run up your credit, in my estimation, if you don't run up your credit, let's say that you have, I don't know, 10 credit cards and with $5,000 limits on all of them, and they're all at $4,380, that's going to affect your credit because you're almost maxed out on all your credit cards, and you almost don't have any credit left, any credit available left to you. Would that give you a 580? I don't think so, but you're going to have some issues when they look at your credit again to give you additional credit. They may say, hey, you're overextended already.
I guess what I'm asking, if there's red flags between the credit background and the criminal background. If you've ever looked at a credit report and said, I wonder if there's some criminal activity going on here based on what we're seeing with the credit.
Not necessarily. I mean, sometimes people with criminal activity, particularly if they've gone to jail for a certain time, they are going to have bad credit because if they had trade lines open and then they go to jail, they don't have any money to pay off these trade lines. So all of them are going to go into some type of collection. So there's a correlation between incarcerated people or people who were arrested and what have you with possibly having bad credit. Does that happen to everyone? Of course not. Yeah.
And that's why HUD has weighed in about credit not necessarily being the best litmus test when you're evaluating an applicant, because HUD has stated affirmatively that there's a disproportionate impact on minorities when it comes to arrests and jail time. So yeah. That's a whole other podcast episode sometime. What about retirees? What about people who are retired and you're running credit on them?
Well, most retirees just to have some type of income, either SSA or maybe they have pensions from their job, and they still are able to, buy a home or, buy themselves a car. So they still have, a credit history going on.
So they should have the fact that they're retired shouldn't impact their credit score negatively.
Not necessarily. I always say everything is possible if that retiree now overextends themselves because they're now on a very limited income and they don't have any potential to gain more income, then possibly they could run into credit issues. But one doesn't correlate the other.
Gotcha. Let's talk about criminal background checks. We talked about it broadly. If we can just dig into it a little more deeply, because this comes up all the time. You know, the association, the board, or the manager gets this lengthy background report and they don't know what they're looking at. So can you kind of break down a criminal background? Give me one of the last ones you've ever looked at and just walk us through it if you could.
Luckily, I kind of did some numbers the other day for another customer, and on average, maybe 15 to 20% of all reports have a criminal background that returns with records.
That has a hit.
Has a hit.
Okay.
So the majority, are not good. 80% of them are going to be no reportable records found, which is easy enough. The problem comes in when you get these reports that have records. And, understandably so, most individuals at a condominium association, especially if they're a volunteer board, they're not familiar with the court system. They don't know what the terms are. So my advice is just to sidetrack for a minute is find yourself a background screening company that can help you. The background screeners know the terms. They know what they are. And if they are available to you when you get a report that you go, oh my gosh, what is this? I have no idea what it is. Then you can pick up the phone and say, hey, I got the report for Joe. There's 2 charges here. I don't know what this is. And they can orient you and give you some feedback as to what those terms mean. So it is challenging, I think, for the average individual that's not around criminal records all the time to understand them. But again, my advice is find yourself a good screener, that they can help you, be available for you, because it's going to be necessary.
You learn something new, because I will tell you that a lot of our associations, they get the report and that's it. That's all they're getting is a report. And then it's up to them or counsel. And again, not all is association counsel. We're not criminal defense attorneys, so we're not always going to be able to really flesh out whatever the charge was. Just for our listeners, can you explain what some of the charges when you see it in those 15 to 20%, like a charge of nolo contendere?
So you have to kind of distinguish between what the defendant pleaded when he was arrested and what the disposition is of the case. So the plea is relatively easy because you go in and you say, hey, I'm not guilty, or I'm guilty, or you do the nolo contendere, and basically it's a Latin word. I hope I didn't butcher it. But
you didn't. I took Latin.
The U.S. the English word is no contest. Basically, you're not saying you're guilty, not guilty. However, in the eyes of the law, really, it's viewed almost as a guilty plea. You're just not agreeing to say I'm guilty. So that's the plea, and then from there on, then you're going to have the entire case. There are going to be weeks and different appointments and what have you that are set. And at some point, hopefully, there is a disposition. And that comes in many forms. And sometimes the same outcome has different words to it. So, for example, take a conviction. The conviction can read guilty, can read convicted, can read no contest, can read they paid a fine. They could be nolo contendere.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those technically involve a conviction. You have your deferred adjudications. That's when a judge kind of withhold things till you complete some type of program. The program could be, a drug abuse program, some other program, and then at that point,
a diversionary program,
a diversion type of program, correct.
And what would the disposition be if the person is found not guilty? It'll just say not guilty or dismissed,
dismissed. Yeah, your dismissals, you have dismissed, nolle prosequi, nolle pros, which are the same thing, withdrawn, no file, no information, and then you also have the no charges filed, where the person was arrested and then it didn't go to trial. Just the district attorney's office figured, hey, we have no case, or they maybe made us deal somewhere before the person went to trial, and then they just decided to file no charges against the individual. You have sentences vacated, which is another term, and then you have pending. Pending comes up a lot because on new cases, and especially with COVID. Oh gosh, everything just got so backed up. You probably can attest to that. I mean, traffic court was backed up a year and a half, so uh, there are still cases that are pending, that are going through the whole process, and in those cases, we should be able to give you a court docket just to see, what's taking place.
I would urge volunteer boards and management professionals to work with a company that explains what these various terms on the criminal background mean, because I think expecting those folks to just pour through this report and try to connect the dots, I just think you're asking for confusion at least, and possibly incorrect interpretations at worst.
So I encourage our customers to call us if they don't understand the report. Some do, some don't, and I kudos to the ones who take advantage of it and don't take a stance on information they don't know about. But yeah, it's available with us. That's one of our key points.
How many people do you think lie on the applications when it asks, "Have you ever been arrested or convicted?" And they say no, and then of course it comes back, yes.
They are. I don't see. My goal, my role these days is more on the sales and business development and going out to customers, and that's where I kind of just mentioned to them, hey, if you need help, let us know. If we can't get the answers, we'll try to find it for you. So I don't see reports and applications a lot anymore like I used to. But yeah, a lot, Mark. No, hoping that it doesn't show up. I mean,
I guess so. Or hoping that maybe it's a bluff and a report's not actually being run, which might be happening in some communities.
That could be it. They may think that maybe they don't do it and they just bluff you. You're correct.
What are the fees? So we've talked about, let's say an association comes to you and says, look, here's the application, here's the applicant. We want to run credit and criminal. What's the range of fees?
It really a little bit depends on volume. How many do they order per month or per year?
Okay.
But on average, I would say just a simple background, like you mentioned, $17, $20, $25, depending on whether they get the eviction search or they don't get the eviction search, which is a pure criminal, about $15. Credit, criminal, and eviction, maybe $20, $25. Just kind of
that is good to know. And I will tell you, in this is going to vary state by state. We have people listening, in all different locations. But in Florida, for years, the cap on application fees was $100. Now, very recently, that was increased to $150 per applicant. But I hear a lot from clients that say that doesn't cover the background screening. What I think is happening is they're probably getting upcharged.
That's a possibility. And I just, in all fairness, just to backtrack a little bit, when we're doing a background check, and if you're doing a true compliant background check, you have to be able to access certain courts. And everything has gotten so expensive. We're very fortunate in Florida. Florida courts are very reasonable when it comes to providing information. Most of it we can get at no additional cost. But you take a state like New York, and we have so many people from the Northeast in South Florida, to get a court record from the boroughs, which most people live, $99 just to get the data. So imagine we're selling a report for $25. We can't absorb that cost. It has to be passed on. And that's probably some of the issues they're having. Or they may be working with a background screener who's just upcharging them. That's always a possibility. So it's always good to kind of just do a comparison. It never hurts. And if you're happy with who you have, then stay. But
agree. Good, very good point. Okay, I'm going to ask you this question because we've got, especially in South Florida, but throughout Florida and in other states, we've got a lot of international purchasers, right? We've got a lot of international people coming to rent and to purchase. And I get asked this all the time. How do we do a background check on somebody from another country? How do we, is it even possible? So Robert, is it possible?
It is very possible. We do them all day long. A lot of the associations that are our clients will do a background check on international individuals. It's a different playing field when you're dealing with international background checks than if you're used to the United States. So not all countries are the same. Customs, data availability. Um, some are third world countries with very limited resources. So how do we do them? We partner. We partner with reputable, established companies that have worldwide presence, and they have local people. They have local people like courthouses around the world that can run these checks for us. And that's we found we've been doing this, offering internationals almost since our inception. And we found that that's the best process because those local people know the laws. They know how to go to a courthouse. They know the language. In some cases, it's a language that we don't know. We're fortunate in South Florida that a lot of us can speak English and Spanish and some other languages. But for the most part, Asian countries, Middle Eastern countries, how would you, run a background check from here in those countries? It would be impossible. So it is possible. They're costly. When you compare them to what you can get in the United States, and not everything we can get here, we can get there.
Right.
The majority of times, we just simply do a criminal background check.
But you feel confident you can get something.
We feel confident with the service that we use. We've been using two partners for a very long time. We have never had an issue, and we've never had someone come back and say, you missed a record. It's been a very good experience. Both of these partners have been around, like I said, for a very long time, and they are members of the PBSA. That's our trade association. And through our trade associations, all of our members, we subscribe to best practices, FCRA compliance, and everything. And they themselves, because they deal in so many nations, have compliance procedures in place to deal with each country that they're going to service.
So for those boards who hear an applicant say, you can't screen me because my country of origin does not keep any records, you should probably dig a little deeper.
They should. Or at least inquire with your background screening company.
Right.
Hey, is this city or this area in this country available for a background check?
So let's talk about juveniles. So, and I'm not talking about 6-year-olds. I'm talking about 16-year-olds. So I've had communities where you've had residents with a teenager, and let's say they've been tenants in the community. The community is already aware of this troublesome teen, I'll say, and now the individuals are applying for purchase. Is there an ability to run background, criminal specifically, on a juvenile, a 16-year-old? Who would have to consent? Would it be the parents? And can you even get access? Because most juvenile records, criminal records, are sealed.
You're correct. And as far as obtaining the records, in most states, including Florida, with few exceptions, everything that's juvenile is sealed. So no one can have access other than the juvenile themselves, their legal guardian, some law enforcement, or their attorney. Other than that, you can't get it. It's not public information unless a judge decides that for whatever, maybe it's a heinous crime and they decide, hey, you know what, this person should be tried as an adult or what have you. But if it's a true juvenile record, it's not going to be available for the most part. Now, I asked this question to one of our FCRA attorneys a couple of years ago. There isn't really a law that he was aware and that I'm aware that prohibits you from running a background check on a 6-year-old. Is that practical? Of course not. It's almost like ridiculous, right? But the consensus amongst most background screening attorneys is high school. 15, 16-year-olds from there forward. If you want to do juveniles, 15 to 16-year-olds and above is what you should use as your policy, I guess. You don't have, there's nothing that says that the parent has to sign, but it's best practice. If I was running an association and I was going to do records on a juvenile, I would have the juvenile sign the consent form and the parent or guardian sign the consent form. It's just good practice.
Are you doing any checks currently to see if people have firearms? Because we're hearing more and more about incidences of violence in communities, and that actually piqued my interest as to whether or not associations might start asking whether or not the applicant has a registered firearm.
We don't offer that service at that time. That's not to say that maybe the information is available. We work in a way at SARMA that we have all these searches that we offer, which are your typical searches, and then customers that say, but I really need this. It's important to me. And if it makes sense and it's readily available data, we'll look into it for them.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can find it, if it's legally available and we can provide it to them, we'll make it work.
Florida has a red flag law that was passed in the aftermath of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas massacre. And I have one community that is invoking that law where the police will go in if there's sufficient evidence to remove firearms from a unit where the individual has been making threats or maybe erratic or what have you. That's why I thought about that.
Being in the screening industry for some time, the first thing that came to mind was it's not a bad idea, but what do you do about the people that don't have registered arms? And there's quite a few of those.
Yeah,
so
that's very true. And it's the same thing with the red flag law. You can remove the legal firearms from the unit, but that doesn't stop the person later the afternoon from obtaining an illegal firearm. So
it's a tough subject.
What's the strangest thing you've been asked to look into? I'm
somewhere and somebody wants to check their girlfriend or boyfriend, or I'm going out with somebody tomorrow. Can you run a background check on them? And I go, well, of course, that's not what we do, but it's public information. I can try to help you.
I was going to say, as parents, maybe parents reach out to you and say, I want to get a background check on who's dating my child.
Yep. Acquaintances usually are the ones that ask that.
That's
Can you help me out with this?
That's very interesting.
And again, as I mentioned before in our conversation, most of Florida, you can get criminal information on anybody. You don't have to have their permission. You just walk into any courthouse, go to their public terminals, and check anybody out. There's no one stopping you from that.
I never thought about it. Do you have kids, Robert?
I sure do.
It must be terrible to date one of your kids with what you do professionally.
That's funny. Let me see who this guy is up
to. I wish I had those skills. If I had those skills, I would be using them with my kids. So have you ever dealt with a stolen identity situation?
We have. There is very specific FCRA rules that we need to follow when the individual claims that they've had their identity stolen. And then, there are some people even that there are criminal cases against them due to a stolen identity. So it's become a major problem in our society. We do take all the steps that we need to take under the FCRA to help them out. And if we need to correct the report because of that identity, it's immediately corrected based on the FCRA. And then we kind of guide them into a couple of places. The FTC has a web page in their site that is fantastic for people who had their identity compromised, and it gives them all the phone numbers to the bureaus so they can put alerts. They can contact the bureaus. They also have a site that they created that is identitytheft.gov, and you can even report your identity theft from there. They'll issue you a plan for recovery, and they have counselors. So when we get these cases, we kind of encourage those individuals to seek assistance. The government is doing a lot to try to help them out because it's a big problem.
What do you do when your search turns up a sexual predator or somebody on a federal watch list? So what are your obligations at that point as the background screening company to let the client know what you've discovered?
So we're not law enforcement. So let me just make that clear. We don't really have an obligation. There's a few very limited exceptions in federal law, but as in general, we don't have any obligations to report anything to anyone other than accurately complete that report and deliver it to our customer.
Do you highlight it though? Do you spotlight it in any way, or is it the first? If you've got a 14-page report, is it something that they have to go through and find, or is that do you do a summary where you've kind of highlighted it?
Our reports are divided into sections: credit, criminal, eviction, verifications. Within the criminal report, you're going to have all of the cases, but they are together. Now, what I normally recommend for some customers. And again, everybody's looking at cost. I always want to bring this up because I completely understand that the associations have a volunteer board. No one's getting paid. No one's putting money into this pot, and they had limited resources. And whatever they paid the screening company, um, can eat away at those costs. So, um, what I recommend sometimes for associations that are very that have that are very cognizant of sexual predator searches is to have it as a separate item. Because if it comes in as one of the regular items, say maybe on a county search, you'll have all the county searches together. So they're really going to have to look at them one by one. But if you separate that search as a separate item, then you will see it as a separate item. And we do flag our reports. So any report that has anything on any of the items that are part of that report will have a flag on it, and they can immediately see that there's something there. Go look.
And look, for our listeners, if something turns up where it's a sexual predator or it's somebody on a watch list, reach out to counsel. Talk to your attorney about what the next steps are before you start broadcasting that to your residents.
Very, very valid point, because it's very rare. But how about if now that becomes all over the community? You hand that report over to the person because they have a right to their report. And he says, this is not me. And then all of a sudden now everybody's talking about this guy or this individual, and it's not him. How do you fix that? So it's
can't put the genie back in the bottle, which is why you need to talk about it ahead of time.
Yeah. And one other thing that I want to mention too is just kind of be careful what you share. The authorization forms specifically say, who are you authorizing to get that report? If it says XYZ Condominium Association, does that mean everybody in the association or members of that association? So it could be a tricky question as to who is being told what's on these reports.
Well, I'm going to build on that. That's a perfect segue into what I wanted to ask you about, because look, these are volunteers. And even though many of the people sitting on these boards, they've served, on corporate boards, and they had big careers, some of them. But it seems like when they get on the board, the condo or the HOA board, kind of that past knowledge flies out the door, and now they're, a volunteer board member. And there is some confusion and perhaps a more lax approach to things that would not have been the case during their working years. So one question I have is, what kind of guidance, if any, do you give your clients when it comes to storing and transmitting this information? I've seen very sensitive background reports that are sent by email, which is not, and I'm not talking about encrypted, secure email. I'm just talking hitting forward. And then I've seen also, some storage in some of these communities, which is, a room where anybody can walk into it and get the information. So is there any guidance that you convey on how to transmit and store?
We do provide in our end user agreement, and I try to convey that to my customers. There is a section specifically listing their responsibilities as to data privacy, how to store it, how to destroy it, and that sort of thing. So we guide them to that page specifically so they can see that. But of course, being a volunteer board, not a lot of resources, my next comment is, if you're storing these as hard copies, make sure that only certain people should have access. It's keyed, it's maintained. If you're keeping them in some type of electronic files, do you have an IT company that is monitoring your systems? You mentioned a huge no-no is to send any PII information, personal identifiable information, over the internet if you didn't put a password encryption to it. And unfortunately, the general public is not really savvy enough to do these things. So we've tried to create some systems to proactively curtail them to doing things that they should not be doing. So, for example, we still have at the age of the fax, believe it or not, it's too bad it's gone. It was a manual system, but it was secured. You couldn't hack a fax number. Right. It was secure from end to end. Once that's kind of really gone, we try to find a way where how can our customers send us information, applications, IDs, all sorts of things that have personal confidential information to our office and not using the email. And we have, so we kind of create a system where it's cloud-based, it's encrypted and secured. They simply go up and load and boom, boom, boom. The same way they attach it to the email, they attach it to this page and we receive it. We did that. So we've done a couple of things to try to not encourage using the wrong systems.
Well, so what's on the horizon for your industry in terms of new technology?
We've made a lot of huge changes in technology for the better in terms of getting data quicker, verifying it quicker, delivering it back to our customers quicker. There's a couple of things that have happened, and one that's sort of like in infancy right now. The one that have happened, which have really helped a lot, are the use of APIs. And APIs are a technology where one system can talk to another. So I can have my computer system reach out to another computer system, ask for some data, receive that data back, and format it for someone. That was a game changer back then in terms of getting records back and forth, encrypted and securely. Then the next kind of thing that happened, which is still being worked on, is being able to access county records and completing possibly a report within a couple of hours with county information. Usually that mostly you needed a day or two to be able to complete that. Well, there's several counties, unfortunately not all of them yet, most of Florida, most of Texas, and a lot of different other states, that there is artificial intelligence that can ping those counties, send them back, and it still requires manual review before it gets released. But at least the data is here. You didn't have to go get it somewhere else within a couple of hours. That was huge.
Seems like AI is going to impact just about virtually every industry. So I imagine it's impacting yours as well.
Yep. Coming up in October, the PBSA, which is our trade association, has their yearly conference. And there's always new vendors, new products. I'm sure we'll get some new stuff there. But as far as the other service I wanted to talk to you about it's a really cool solution. And it's where the consumer is the one initiating the search. And it's great for employment verifications. Because right now, when you're trying to do an employment verification, you're relying on this uninterested third party. HR departments don't want to hear from you. Yeah. They're swamped. They don't have enough personnel. Most of them that are mid-sized to large have moved their data to some third-party database, like the work number. Super expensive to get that information. So there's new technology where an email is sent to the actual applicant. They securely click on that. They select their payroll company, log in with their payroll credentials, and the system automatically pulls the employment information and sends it back to us and completes the background report.
And there's no way to manipulate that system because you're asking the applicant himself or herself to submit it to their payroll company.
No, they're just logging into the system.
They're just well, what if they use somebody else's login credentials?
It's going to show the different name.
Oh, it will.
It's pulling the data from the payroll. So let's say that, I don't know, you used Paylocity for your payroll. That's the company that we use as SARMA. I have a login into my account. I can't change my name, my social security. HR would have to do that. So if I was completing my own employment verification using that technology, the only thing that I'm doing is providing my login information so the system can capture my name, social security, my title, and my salary.
Aren't people hesitant to actually give up this amount of information to a company? I mean, you must get questions about the safety and security of the information they're providing, and by that I mean the applicants.
All the time. We get questions. We get property managers and board members calling us that they don't want to be provided with a social security number. They don't want to be provided with a date of birth. There are some workarounds to that. For example, we created a product called Quick App, and in Quick App, you send, similarly to this one, you send the applicant an email. It's a secure link. They click on it, and they, in a secure portal, are entering their own information. their own social security, their own date of birth. It stays in our system. When the report goes back to the board members, personal identifiers are truncated. So there's no risk of no one losing it.
Mm-hmm.
No one at the association has this guy's social security number. So they feel a little more comfortable using a system like that to pull the background check part of it.
So your website, SARMA's website, Robert, says you screen social media postings, and obviously that's not for associations, but it did interest me. Which social media sites and why?
So we partner, and this was similarly to what I explained on the international arena. We partner with a company to bring this product to our services. They've been doing this now for 12 years. They're really the pioneers of it, and their reports are FCRA compliant and EEOC compliant. So they're compliant with the state of California, which that's difficult to comply with on anything. And basically, we offer two products. We offer a basic search, and that looks at your major sites, 5 of them, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and it does scrape for the last 3 years. And the scope of it is anything that's kind of business related that could be harmful to a business, such as racism, postings of racism, postings of intolerance, potentially illegal activity being done online. People do that all the time, believe it or not. Post themselves doing crazy things, potentially violent contact or sexually explicit material. That's all the things that they're looking at.
Now that you're mentioning this, though, and I said that it wouldn't necessarily have application for associations, but I'm going to take that back because in a lot of our associations, some of the things they're looking for is people who are violating the short-term rentals. So they're putting information out on Airbnb and other short-term rental sites. And I can imagine somebody doing that on Facebook and saying, hey, I've got this for rent. And also people who may be making threats on these sites against the board, or employees of the association.
Yeah. It looks for threats and that sort of thing. The Pro, which is the better search, looks at all sites, and it goes back 7 years as opposed to 3. It's a good search. Some employers like it, especially for high-end positions, but you have a very valid point. Associations may be interested in that type of service.
This is the next horizon. But again, listen, you can find things. As lawyers, we're trained to say, don't ask questions that you don't want to know the answers to. So be careful what you're looking for. And before you act on what you learn, obviously you're going to have a conversation with counsel to figure out whether or not anything you've learned, how it should be handled, and whether it should be discussed or further acted upon.
Correct.
I haven't asked you, but how did you get into this field?
As I mentioned earlier, I was in the mortgage industry for a very long time.
Right.
I calculated the other day, it was 12 years. I was really kind of looking for a change, and I wanted to own my own business, really. That's what I was looking at. I was looking at different options, and they kind of clicked on me, and I said to myself, well, wait a minute. Every banking job I've had, a background check has been done on me. I can't remember one that I didn't go through a drug test, through a criminal background check. Gosh, my first one out of savings and loan, I got polygraphed. So it was like crazy. I was so nervous about doing a polygraph. I go, I'm going to fail. And I didn't do anything wrong. Anyway, so long story short, I started thinking about that. And then it dawned on me, I was very familiar with credit scores, same thing. All sorts of verifications. We do those on the mortgage side. Only kind of needed to learn a little bit about the criminal side. And I started looking into that and met with a relative who had another small company. We joined it together, and it became United Screening. And here we are. Rest is history.
I mean, I'm joking, but is it intimidating to your family that this is your background?
No, not really. No, no. They just usually ask, "Hey, can you help me with this?"
It's like that movie. Have you ever seen the movie Meet the Parents?
Of course.
Are you a human lie detector, Robert?
No.
So we're almost out of time, but what is your best advice for volunteer board members and their managers when it comes to background screenings?
If you're not doing them, I think it's important to do them. At least a criminal background check. And the reason I say that is because a community can quickly go downhill, including good people moving out, affecting community prices, unit prices, the sellability of these units. I mean, when bad apples move in and bad apples bring other bad apples, those other friends, vandalism starts happening. People breaking into cars. So, if anything, at least do a criminal background check. The other kind of thing that we haven't touched upon, and I want to kind of mention this with a grain of salt because I don't want to be construed as legal advice. Don't have blanket policies. Don't have knockout things. The best practice by the EEOC on the employment side, by the FTC and the CFPB on everything else, including tenant screening, is individualized assessment. You want to make an assessment on the person as you see them. You look at time periods. Bad things happen to good people. Death in the family, sickness, hospitalizations. Don't say I don't hire a convicted criminal ever. Well, how long are you going to penalize someone? That's not our job to give you data for you to deny people. You have to be informed about the person and make a logical decision. They say, hey, you know what? This person is 50 years old. For 25 years, they didn't do anything. They had this mishap, and now for the last 15, they haven't done anything. Shouldn't they deserve a chance? I mean, believe me, career criminals continually offend. So I would say that, make sure that you don't have these knockout. We don't rent or we don't approve anybody with a 620 or less. Now you're asking for trouble if you take that approach. So that would be my recommendations. And the last one, I hate to harp on it, but I think it's very good, is find yourself a good background screening company. If it's SARMA, great. It's not a pitch for SARMA. It's a pitch to find someone who you feel comfortable with working, that's available for you and can help you when you have that tough file. That tough file that I don't know what to do with this. You can pick up the phone and say, get somebody helping. And maybe they can't help at the very moment, but they say, hey, I can pull a couple of other things that may give us a little bit better clear on why that case has that disposition or that. So that would be the kind of three things that I would recommend.
I am so glad you touched on the blanket policies because they are problematic for so many reasons, but particularly because they can result in very good potential residents being denied and being denied over things, like you say, that are not truly reflective of who that person is and the type of resident they're going to be. So I'm really grateful that you touched on that. And I want to thank you for spending so much time with us today.
No, thank you for having me. It's been awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to follow and rate us on your favorite podcast platform or visit takeittotheboard.com for more ways to connect.